All right, what's up, everybody? We have Matt Hertz today from Third Person. Third Person is a 3PL matchmaker for brands. Matt has a really interesting background coming from the ops side of running brands and understands the needs and know-hows and what you should be looking for in a 3PL. So, as a 3PL ourselves and a WS manager, we really want to know what brands are looking for, how we could provide better services, as well as what brands need to be aware of. But I'll start with you, Matt. Like, give us a little background about Third Person. What got you into that? Like, especially just jumping in from the ops side to the matchmaking side, and then maybe a little more if you can.
Yeah, sure. It's difficult to advise people on what to do operationally if you haven't actually faced those problems yourself. I have all the respect in the world for consultants, and some of my best friends are consultants and have been really successful. But I always kind of over-index towards people who have actually solved a problem before they advise clients and friends and folks in the ecosystem, as to how to solve those exact problems. So, yeah, with that said, David, you're right. I started my career, well, I actually started my career in finance. So very different than sort of operating and
Oh, wow.
ops and logistics. Yeah. But as I always say, it's sort of similarly quantitative, and there's usually problems can often be solved in finance just like they can be in supply chain. So, spent the first 2 years of my career in finance, worked at a hedge fund in New York City where I moved after college. And then back in 2009, I'm almost aging myself, 17 years ago, is when I formally dipped my toes into the sort of startup e-commerce and operations world. And I say formally because back in middle school and high school, I had a sports cards and collectibles business back on eBay. When I was 12 or 13, and I always joke that I survived the first dot-com bubble in the late 90s, but that was more of a side hustle before it was called a side hustle. But yeah, 2009, I joined Rent the Runway, a women's dress rental business, which is now a public company. Joined them as an early employee in their first operations hire to help them scale up initially, and then joined the co-founders at Birchbox in the subscription commerce space. Ran their supply chain for about 4 years, what became a global supply chain. We were shipping about 1 million orders a month at our peak, and then spent some time in San Francisco at a logistics startup called Ship. And then about 10 years ago in 2017, I started a consulting business, essentially helping emerging and high growth e-commerce brands solve a lot of the same challenges that I faced as an operator myself. So everything from negotiating shipping rates to outsourcing to a 3PL, procurement, packaging, planning, all that good stuff. When COVID came around, as we can all remember a few years ago, we were well positioned, candidly. E-com and supply chain were good crossroads to be in. And what we saw was that the number one service that brands were coming to us seeking our support with was helping them find the right 3PL partner. So, long story short, and we can certainly dig into that later, David, but we decided to essentially productize that kind of 3PL search service that we were offering brands, and we started building software that became Third Person to really help kind of scale that offering. So I'll pause there, David, because I know I've been rambling for a little bit, but hopefully that gives you a little bit more context on my background.
Yeah, what depth do you have when it comes to the operation side? I mean, coming from especially the finance side, I'm not sure what your ICP is for third person's target market, but it seems like that's one of the biggest like downsides, I guess, for some of those brands is they don't recognize the operational cost it takes to have a 3PL or to keep it in house and what are the hidden costs from there. But you kind of come to the table with that knowledge just in hand, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, many, in my experience, some of the best e-commerce brands are those that have been built by sales and marketing people, right? And like growth
Mm-hmm.
experts, because you can have a great product or a great service, but if you don't know how to sell it, who the heck cares, right? Like you got to be able to sell. Sales is so important in any organization. Um, the flip side of that is that salespeople and marketing people are not operators, right? They're not ops people. I mean, certainly there are people out there who are good at all those trades, but again, in my experience, a really great salesperson doesn't really understand or comprehend the intricacies and the difficulty of operations. And then, they do a great job on their side of the house, kind of scaling up their business from a sales perspective. And they're like, holy crap, we're doing thousands and thousands of orders a day, and we're outgrowing our garage or our little, warehouse, or we're working with a 3PL that's just not scalable. And they almost try to kick the can down the road, so to speak, on these really, really important supply chain problems. So I'd almost maybe fact check what I just said or course correct and say that, in fact, the most successful e-commerce businesses that I've come across are those that were led by operators, where they brought in, someone with a background or experiences like myself early on to really help them scale their business more effectively.
Right. And I mean, you came from Birchbox. I would consider them one of the original like box subscription, methods like back in the day when you're really out running Facebook ads. And that was really new, but very operationally like heavy, right? To be able to conceptualize all of that. Obviously, they did a really good job in marketing, in sales, but that's the operations behind that. It wasn't easily duplicated, right? So you can kind of see like, okay, that is something that they definitely had a good grasp on and then built a really good company. With third person in regards to your software and your matchmaking software, you probably have all of these data points. And when we talk about operations, there's endless data points of what to make decisions off of what makes the good predictors, what are the most important data points that make those predictors good for a brand 3PL fit. Like what are you instantly looking at when it comes to that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, David, at the core of our product is this AI powered algorithm that we built, this proprietary algorithm that, to your point, essentially captures a whole host of data points from both the brand who's signing up. Let's take David's hot sauce company as an example, and sort of compares, about 40 different variables or requirements that you've shared with us against, the ICPs, the ideal client profiles of each of the 3PLs or warehouses on our platform. Today, we've got over 500 unique 3PLs, about 1,500 facilities if you sort of add them all up. So, I'm sort of answering your question maybe in a slightly different way, but what I think we're getting at is the 3PL market is so fragmented, right? Here in the United States alone, there's literally over 10,000 3PLs. I was having lunch with some friends at Shopify a couple of weeks ago, and without me prompting them, they actually told me that there's over 20,000 3PLs. So I said, oh, okay, well, you know, 2x what I thought there were, right? So even more than I thought, right? The point is that there's a lot of them, and they're really hard to differentiate. And unfortunately, brands are really, really good at picking the wrong 3PL. They rely on Google searches, or, now increasingly, ChatGPT or Claude or whatever your AI poison of choice is, to kind of, or, Reddit, other tools like that, to help discover the best 3PL. And we're saying, hold on a second, like, the relationship between a brand and a 3PL, I say this all the time, it's kind of like a marriage, right? And what works for you, David, and a partner is probably different than what works for Matt and a partner. And it's not because you're right and I'm wrong, or I'm right and you're wrong. It's just that we have different requirements in a partner, right? Like you're in Salt Lake City, or just south of Salt Lake. I'm in Nashville, right? Like, just that point alone, like we have different geographical preferences, in what makes a good partner and where we want to live our life, right? And with a brand, like it's very similar, where, order volumes and SKU count and product type and velocity of orders and where you're importing product from and sales channels and geographical preferences. Maybe I'm repeating myself, but there's so many variables in what, and like, what's your communication style, right, David? Like, are you kind of, maybe I'll say, more old school and you like emailing? Other people like want to FaceTime their account manager or text or be on, Slack or Teams or a channel like that. And like everyone's a little bit different. So, it just it kills me when I see brands using a suboptimal or a short-sighted kind of approach to finding a 3PL. The good news is that it creates a lot of value for our business because we're, third person is in a position to really help distill this fragmented universe down to just a small handful of 3PLs that we believe are qualified for a brand specific needs.
Yeah, and when you're talking about like the mismatch of certain, brands, what's most common? Like if you're gonna warn somebody like, hey, you just got to make sure you're looking at. There's some obvious ones. I literally was just right before this on a prospect call with another brand, and they're like, I need to be in Phoenix, but there are no options in Phoenix, and I have 20 options in, just in South Salt Lake area, and I'm like, well, if you want to be in Phoenix, but there are no options in Phoenix, but you're pushing yourselves up north, like why would you want to do that, right? But the CEO really wants this. So what are other common mistakes that you find brands kind of conflicting with when they're trying to make this decision and like they have to make sacrifices, I guess, somewhere. What are you more willing to make sacrifices on, and what are you like? No, you can't make sacrifices on these operational, pillars, I guess.
Yeah, I'd say like a common one that operators sort of fail at is, or I shouldn't say operators, but brands is that and similarly, I was just on a call with the 3PL right before this, and they're going through an RFP, and they were asking for my kind of insider baseball on how they sort of are positioned in an RFP. And anyways, brands are often picking a 3PL based on price, and cost is so important to brands. And I think increasingly, just given the environment we're in, obviously inflationary pressures, tariffs, and how that's kind of impacting the macro scene, consumer spending, and sort of concerns around that. Brands will always be concerned about price, period, right? Even during the good times. But I feel like, yeah, but I feel like just in the last few years, kind of coming out of COVID, price has been like the number one driver in 3PL selection for an overwhelming number of brands that we've supported. And I'm not going to sit here and say that price is not important, that cost is not important. Absolutely, right? Like typically brands are paying their 3PL or logistics spend is about 15 to 20% of top line. So it's a significant cost. But um, there's so much more to finding a great partner than cost. And like price and a slick sales pitch should not trump like operational fit, right? Like choosing a partner that's great at apparel when the brand ships oversized or big and bulky goods, or picking on lowest cost per unit without weighting, error rates or chargebacks or SLAs is short-sighted, but it's a headline number. It's something that brands are really good at evaluating. You can throw it into Claude and put in 5 PDFs of pricing into Claude and tell Claude to essentially tell me who's the cheapest, right? Uh, and brands are doing that all day long, and it has no like Claude is not really good at understanding account management and SLAs in the same way. So it's just unfortunately kind of a canary in a coal mine for a lot of 3PL selection these days.
Interesting. Yeah, it's become difficult, and I don't blame the brands, especially now. I mean, since COVID as well, where even like Amazon is charging you an 8% surcharge fee, and you're like, whoa, what's that? And then they're messing around with how you're running advertising. And so brands can't catch a break, really, when it comes to all of these fees and credit card fees increasing everywhere they go. And then it's just like, what's another fee? But you're right, it's maintaining and keeping a good relationship and operations running. There's a lot to balance there for sure. With in like what you have going on right now, and you kind of mentioned geography. That's kind of an easy one to say, like, look, this is where you need to be. Do you find it like you spoke of like some insider baseball? Maybe we can get into that. What regions, and since you might have some of this data, are kind of blowing up in the 3PL and operation standpoint? Is it still, we've kind of heard of it before when I first got into 3PL, it's that triangle and it's where you are in Nashville where there's like massive 250,000, which is small square foot facilities to a million square foot facilities. Is that still kind of the hub, or are you finding any other locations kind of growing now that there's 20,000 3PLs? They can't all fit in, the Nashville area. But what's some insight that you might have there for brands and maybe other 3PLs?
Yeah, I don't have reason to believe that it's sort of shifted materially over the last decade. Um, there's certainly some trends in people being outpriced and kind of, for example, like instead of LA, the Inland Empire in Southern California, you're seeing kind of more of a shift inland or, more east, right? So, whether that's Vegas or Reno, right? One
Right.
state over, or even Phoenix, one more state over. You're kind of seeing that shift. And similarly on the East Coast, instead of like, central New Jersey or South Jersey or Bergen County in New Jersey, kind of being a traditional hub for warehousing, it's kind of shifted a little bit more west to like PA, to Pennsylvania, right? Outside of Philly, in Harrisburg, even central PA, right? Lancaster and kind of that, Middletown, markets like that. And instead of Chicago, right, people are going a little bit more south. So it's Columbus and it's kind of closer to where I am in Nashville. But I think generally, intuitively, you want warehousing close to where your customers are, right, to reduce that time in transit and to reduce that spend. Unfortunately, a mistake that I see a lot is that, and I made this mistake earlier in my career when I was at Birchbox. I remember our first warehouse. We wanted it, and this is 15 years ago, so again, I'm aging myself a little bit, but we wanted the warehouse to be near where we were, right? Our office was in New York, and there was peace of mind that and again this is pre-Uber, but we can get in a cab or get on the train, Jersey Transit, and be at our warehouse within an hour or two, if we had to for any number of reasons, right? um, but really, like, finding a warehouse near the founder's hometown or near the VP of Ops, hometown or HQ should not be what you optimize for, right? You should be optimizing for where your customer base is. So, to sort of optimize for, zones and costs and transit times and all that good stuff. So, yeah, we're seeing kind of, obviously Chicago, the Northeast, PA, New Jersey, Atlanta's a big market. You just kind of service the Southeast, the West Coast, the Southwest, continues to be popular. And then kind of that Dallas Fort Worth market, has been a very, very popular hub for fulfillment.
I kind of wanted to close off on talking more about third person, us being obviously in the marketing side, but also in the fulfillment. We're a 3PL, and you have to appeal to both, right? So let's talk about third person, your differentiating factors, like why should 3PLs and how should we be on the platform to be better communicative and make sure that we, sell ourselves there, as well as brands, what to look out for, how important it is to follow up, to make sure that the cadence there is, good. And I'm not the brand, so I'm kind of just talking out of one side of my mouth there. But let's talk about third person and how it helps both of those markets really. And like, if you can dive in as much as you can about it, that would be great. But I know that there's obviously you're playing both sides of the coin here to appeal to 3PLs and making sure. But at the end of the day, it seems like the brand is the customer, and you need to make sure that they are coming back and they're pushing, hey, if you need to find a 3PL, go to third person because they know how to get you that match, right? So yeah, I'll hand it back off to you. What's that like?
Yeah, so you're right. Third person's a marketplace. So we've got, demand and supply, demand being brands, supply being 3PLs. Um, we think of our customers both, right? Um,
Mhm.
a mentor of mine told me many years ago that your customers who pays you money, right? Who you generate revenue from. And there's a lot of truth to that. If that was the case, then sure, the 3PL is our customer. But because it's a marketplace, 3PLs are only happy, they're only content with us if they're getting the right qualified lead. So we absolutely spend a ton of time, both creating value and servicing the 3PL customer, as well as building kind of a mousetrap where we can attract as many brands as possible. And from a brand perspective, like we want to attract as many brands as possible. From a 3PL perspective, we don't want to send as many brands as possible to a 3PL. We want to send as many qualified brands to a 3PL. And I think that's a significant source of differentiation between what we're building at third person and maybe some of my peers and competitors and other channels to get leads is that we we are focused on quality over quantity. And again, we also want quantity, but qualifying that lead for a 3PL is the most important thing that we do. What we don't want to become is another noisy lead gen channel for a 3PL, right?
Right.
3PLs get leads from all sorts of sources, trade shows and social media, LinkedIn and Google and other inbound, having salespeople, outbound sales, et cetera, right? There's a lot of ways you can get leads, having a podcast like this. And we want to be sure that the moment that a brand decides that they want to connect with a 3PL, it's because our proprietary algorithm that I mentioned earlier, it has scored that 3PL a high score. And without getting into too many details in the interest of time here, essentially what we do after the brand signs up is then we score that brand against each of the warehouses on our platform, and we present the top 10 matches ranked by score. So immediately, the brand is only seeing the top 10 out of over 1,000 warehouses on our platform. They're only seeing the top 10 that are qualified to support them based on what our algorithm thinks will be a good fit. So we're already kind of stacking the deck in your favor. Imagine, David, back when you were, a single guy and dating, if I came around and said, "Hey, David, here are the 10 people who would make for the best partner for you," right? I know everything about you. I know your hobbies and your interests and how you want to live your life. Here are the 10 people that I know would make a great partner. You'd be like, "This is incredible." Well, I think you would say that, right? I certainly would have said that, right?
Yes,
Uh,
exactly.
rather than going through the whole kind of dating and, however, folks end up finding partners today. So that's what we're trying to do here. We want to strip away the noise. And, the way that we work commercially is that I believe that our incentives at third person are strictly aligned with ensuring that you only see those qualified matches and that you're able to close those deals. So we're really focused on discovery and connection and focused on qualifying those matches.
Awesome. No, I really appreciate that. That makes a lot of sense. And I mean, as a 3PL, we're on other matchmakers as well. And how many times do I get matched with somebody again that's like, "Hey, you should, date this coworker of mine I know," and maybe they kick it off and they have no clue, right? And they've also introduced her to 100 other people, and I'm like, "Who am I?" So it seems like this is like way more fine tuned to that particular person, and you kind of have that already warm intro, know that this is a good match, and so now it's kind of up to them to make that rest of the decision from there. But I really appreciate your time, Matt. Well, we'll finish off with letting people know how to find you, to get more information on third person, and anywhere else you kind of want to direct them.
Sure. Yeah, very, very quickly. Yeah, thirdperson.co is our website, not .com. We were too cheap to buy the .com. But yeah, third person, THIRD, person.co. I'm pretty active on social media, particularly LinkedIn. So just, pop my name, Matthew Hertz. Yeah, I think Matthew Hertz, you should be able to find me. Or email me, Matt, M-A-T-T at thirdperson.co, and we'd love to connect with anyone.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks, Matt. I appreciate your time and good luck. And everybody, we'll catch you on the next one. See ya.